Now we have four phenomenal guests coming on the show today. Just confirmed. The host of ESPN's Daily Wager, Doug Kezirian, will be joining us today on the show. Doug actually wrote to me. He read, "I'm sure you have other NBA guests on today. He wants to do all WNBA." Which I'm like, okay, I'm sure we'll ask him like a question about the NBA, but Doug wants to talk WNBA. He handicaps it. That'll be awesome. WNBA starting this weekend.
It seems like the WNBA, I don't know a lot about it. Seems like the best team wins all the time, or a team that wins a lot of games wins all the time. We've had a couple of years where that didn't happen. Do you agree that it should be those two and everybody else? Is there any team outside of those two where you'd be like, well, if things broke right, or maybe, or they have this star player, or is it as simple as the market has it?
It's as simple as the market has it. I think there's betting opportunities elsewhere in other season-long props, but in terms of title odds, I would not jump on like the Mystics at 13-1. I just think, if anything, the yes-no could be interesting because there's no conferences, so it's all 12 and the seeding. So you could see a situation where the Liberty and Aces play each other in the semis, just the way the bracket could unfold in case one of them has a significant injury and they don't get the top two seeds from the regular season. That would be one angle. I just think there's such depth there. So that even if they do sustain an injury or load management, it's not like Shaq and Kobe and everyone else. I mean, there's former MVPs and then there's like all-stars rounding out the top five. It's insane. Like the Aces were loaded last year and then add Candace Parker and they still have depth. And I think the Liberty have more depth. They have three good players off the bench, like really good players that could easily start. So there's a lot of depth there. And then the league has parity, but some teams just don't have near the star power. So, yeah, I expect these teams to be double-digit favorites in basically every other game except for when they play each other.
Do you have a specific player of that core group of Vegas and New York players that you like? Will they all kind of cannibalize each other because they're super teams and someone else can win? Like, how are you approaching handicapping the MVP market?
It's a great question because – obviously, Stewart is the talent in there, but like Plum almost won it last year, and maybe she shines and continues to progress. I would go the route of not betting one of them, just with the assumption that maybe they cannibalize one another and that they're going to be so far ahead. It's like, well, really, like we expected it, and if they didn't have one of them, or maybe their production, their numbers, just sheer numbers won't be that good because they'll just be sharing the rock and it'll all be about team success. I know LeBron won it the year, or should have won it, I should say, the first year he was in Miami. They gave it to Derrick Rose, but that was, I think, more of a fallout from the decision the previous summer. But he still put up great numbers, and he was the best player widely considered. I think there's like a debate who the best player is right now. And you mentioned all the people you mentioned. Even Jonquel Jones at 30-1. That's pretty ridiculous considering she is a former MVP and she could really shine in this situation. But the one bet I made is sort of that next tier. So there's those two at the top. The next tier is supposed to be Washington Mystics and Connecticut Sun. And I think there's a path to victory, as we talk about in the fight world, where like the three or the four, whoever gets that 3 seed or 4 seed is like, if they have a dominant star, like they might get the buzz just to sort of reward them and realize, well, they're more valuable because the other teams are so loaded. So I actually bet Alyssa Thomas at 50-1 and 25-1. It's 20-1 right now. She's the best player. She was fourth in the MVP voting last year, second in Defensive Player of the Year. She is a really interesting player because she can control the game so much, even though she's lost some of her outside shots. So she's down to floaters because, like, I think it's a shoulder injury, but stud defender. She like makes that team go, and I think they're going to be really good. Like I like them over 22.5 wins. I like them plus 550. I want to say at over 25.5 or over 25 wins. So that's sort of like a prop you can bet in an index. And yes, the Sun lost Jonquel Jones, a former MVP, and she's great, but they had what they would say as 6 starters last year. Brianna Jones came off the bench, and she was their second leading scorer, and she played center. And so she's obviously going to have a more elevated role. And they lost their point guard, Courtney Williams, but they have a big four, so to speak. And they got Tiffany Hayes to come over. So I think there's a lot to like with the Sun. So I went the MVP route for a team that's expected in the 3rd or 4th tier. Just for comparison, Elena Delle Donne's the star of the Mystics. She's 7-1. So, like, if Thomas is the star of a team that ends up getting the 3 seed, like, that's where I think the value is. I mean, I would put Thomas at, like, 12-1, not 20-1 or 25-1.
From the comfort of their homes, You Better You Bet presents Golf Bets. Now up to the tee box, it's Nick Costos, Ken Barkley, and Tyler Morales.
There could also be from the band Toto, Georgie, Porgy, Puddin' Pie, Kissed the Girls and Made Them Cry. That could have been included as well. Just thinking of that.
Oh, yeah.
But we got to give you bets for the PGA Championship here. Our pal Tyler Morales has tons of stuff here. Tyler, we've got a lot of time here. You've got as much runway as you want, man. Tyler Morales' bets and angles and thoughts here on the PGA Championship at Oak Hill coming up first.
So I'm not going to lie, this has probably been one of the more fascinating, I think it's the most fascinating golf tournament that I've ever kind of handicapped here, because this golf course we really haven't played. Last time we played it was in 2013, and they've kind of changed the whole entire golf course. It's longer. The rough is crazy. Like, go outside, go in your backyard, drop a golf ball. That's what they're going to be hitting out of. So a lot of these guys are going to be wanting to keeping in the fairway, but you can't because the fairways aren't that narrow, aren't that long. So it's going to be interesting. Some of these, there's 2 holes that are 600 yards. The par 4s are like in the upper 400s. There's par 3s that are in the 200s. So a lot of people think that distance is going to matter here, and I tend to agree. The way I think this golf tournament's going to play out is that if you're short off the tee, we can just eliminate you off the bat. You have no chance. Morikawa, Tom Kim, sorry, I don't think you're going to have a chance here. If you're going to miss the fairway, that's which most people are because the fairways aren't very wide. You got to be able to hit your long irons really far. There's a guy on Twitter, Andy Lack. He walked the golf course and he kind of mapped out like where most of the shots are going to come from, and it was 175 to 200 and 200 plus. So long irons are going to be a key here. The greens are super small, so no one's going to be holding greens either. So around the green play is going to be really good. So if you can't chip, Morikawa, you will get destroyed by this. Cam Young as well. So you kind of have to, this sounds like very cliche, but you got to be kind of an all-around golfer here. You can't be bad at a certain skill set. So I try to pick guys that are very good all-around golfers, and hopefully we can buy low on some of these guys. So my first golfer I took, nobody wants him. We've teased on the show a couple of times. I took Rory at 16 to 1. I kind of think the price is kind of nuts. Him playing bad doesn't really bother me. Everyone's saying, oh, the form's poor. Rahm was 31st, 34th, and withdrew, and then he won the Masters. And that was the reason I took him, because we could buy low on him. The driver's been really bad for Rory. A lot of people have been saying that, but I don't think it's much of a question for me, because the last 3 times he's lost strokes off the tee. The Tour Championship 2021, followed it up with a win. Valero 2022, followed up with the second at the Masters. St. Jude in 2022, followed it up with an 8th. What that tells me is that he bounces back, and he's had time off here. So I'm not a Rory guy. I actually think I hate Rory McIlroy after watching Full Swing. I'm not going to lie. I am not a Rory guy, and I know the Rory supporters are being insufferable, but I'm going to bet him here at 16 to 1, and we're going to see what happens. Justin Thomas, I also took 33 to 1. He's trending last 3, cut 25th and 14th, and Pat Mayo said on the show earlier, his putter's been so bad, but we don't need him to rely on putting here. This isn't going to be a putting. Pat thinks it'll be a putting contest. I do not. And his around the green game is as good as it gets, and the ball striking is getting really good, so I like Justin Thomas. Another guy I didn't bet, but I have convinced myself, I think he's my favorite bet here, is Matthew Fitzpatrick, 35 to 1. This is going to play a ton like a U.S. Open. Will Brinson said it yesterday. People at the golf course said it a ton. This is going to play like a U.S. Open. The number 1 tee to green per round at U.S. Opens the last 5, Matthew Fitzpatrick is number 1. And he's finished top 10 out of 3 out of the last 4. He's top 15 at avoiding bogeys. Got to avoid bogeys here. You don't want to drop. 13th on tour in final round scoring. So when he's in competition at the end, he's played his best. And I love Matthew Fitzpatrick at 35 to 1 all around game, and he's getting a ton of distance off the driver. He's one of the furthest drivers off the tee all of a sudden, and that came out of nowhere. I think he's one of the better bets here. And here's a long shot that this isn't a joke. I actually like it. Bryson's 160 to 1, and the last time we had it set up like this at Winged Foot, he won. And I know he's lost a ton of weight. You're gonna look at him and be like, oh, this isn't Bryson that we saw. He's completely different. But he played well at the last live event in Tulsa. And he said at post-interview, why? Because I was watching. And he said he feels good. This is the first time his irons have felt this good in for a long time. So I took Bryson at 160 to 1. So my outrights are Rory, Justin Thomas, Matthew Fitzpatrick, my favorite one there, and Bryson at 160 to 1.
So the story of everything about the PGA this year and the majors has been, and Pat Mayo said it when he came on, Pat keeps betting kind of like the middle tier of golfer, like the guys past the favorites, that kind of second, third tier. And he hasn't had a lot of success this year because those guys haven't won very much. J-Maz comes on, says the same thing. He always likes to target guys in those range. And like they both say the same thing, like, man, been a tough year. And the reason for that is that the like dead favorites, like the guys at the absolute top, have won every single tournament basically so far, or it's been like 1,000 to 1 long shot. First major, Rahm. Ton of tournaments, Rahm, Scheffler. If you price shop Rahm, Scheffler, and Rory to win the tournament and essentially create a bet on one of the three of them winning this tournament. Normally that would be like pretty asinine because like golf tournaments have 140 golfers and they're usually a little more wide open, except this year hasn't been like that at all. If you price shop them, like if you use it the same book, you probably get 3-1 on them to win. Price shop it, maybe get that to 4-1 on Rory or Rahm or Scheffler to win. I think you might be able to get maybe 3-1, maybe 350. We'll kind of see how it goes. I think that's just what I'm going to do. I'm just going to literally slam all three of them to win the tournament. And that's the kind of year it's been in golf.
Wow. So no one else. I think that's really interesting, actually. I think I might want to do that also.
That's been the story of golf this year, is that the middle is not nearly as good as it's been the last couple of years. The bottom has no chance. The live golfers were very competitive at the Masters, so it's not like they're necessarily part of this. It's been dominated by you have the Tiger era is different from every other era, and there are unique singular golfers that are awesome. But man, you Scheffler and Rahm both in their absolute prime right now, and undervalued Rory, who probably won't win, but the price seems pretty crazy to me.